It says this hangout on air is live. We are live. Mitchell, I don't know you at all. I saw on your profile on Twitter it says something about F sharp, and I'm like, ooh, I could probably learn something from him. And you're in Australia. Are you currently in
Yeah,
Australia?
yeah. So I'm like the really top north part of Sydney, Australia.
I have family in Australia, believe it or not. I think he's the only black
Oh,
person in the entire country. He lives in the Gold Coast. I don't know where that's at though. Have you heard of the Gold
ah,
Coast?
yeah, that's in the like northeast coast.
Okay. Yo, what does your T-shirt say?
This is don't fear the monads.
Oh wow, I want one of those, but I haven't graduated to learning about monads yet. I'm still doing object-oriented programming when it comes to side effects. So yeah. So what you do F sharp? Did I see Haskell on your profile too? I saw something.
Yeah, I've been trying to like learn F sharp for like 4 years. I think Haskell for about half that time.
Yeah. Which one is more natural, or they're both equally challenging?
I probably know a bit more F sharp than I know Haskell because I took a course on SML, which is kind of like one of the grandfather languages of like Haskell and F sharp. But yeah, not really using it. Not really using it in my day job, unfortunately. So
You're.
at the moment, I'm most
I'm
sorry.
sorry. I'm listening.
So at the moment, I'm working for a startup called Seatfrog, and the idea of the business is to auction off unsold business class seats to people in economy at the last minute. And for them, I've mostly been doing Android native Android Java apps, but I do have half the app written in Kotlin.
Hmm. So Java, this is a question, not a statement, but Java is a lot more verbose than I assume you know C sharp too, if you're doing F sharp.
Yeah, I actually did like Xamarin professionally for about a year and a half before joining the startup.
Okay. And they
Yeah.
just wanted straight Java. Like how much of out of curiosity, how much more verbose is Java compared to C sharp, or is it?
If you're just using like, I guess what you could call vanilla Java, it's a lot more verbose. Like, though that's changed somewhat recently because Android used to be stuck in Java 6, where if you wanted to pass a callback to something, you'd have to pass a class, and you can do anonymous inner classes, but you still got to do like the new class, and then you have to put the override in there. Lots of boilerplate.
Yeah.
Um, Android recently, I think Google I/O this year announced that he's supporting in Android uh, Nougat or Duget. I can't remember how to pronounce it in American. Um, yeah,
Or
so they're
Java 8 is supported now for Android development.
yeah in Nougat, and for previous versions, what they're doing is they're kind of weaving the bytecode so that you can use Java 8 syntax, and they will just kind of transpile it back from Java 8 to what Java 6 would accept.
That sounds like aspect-oriented programming, but I guess that wouldn't be because at the end of the day, it's just the code
Well,
gets
no,
compiled down to for Microsoft. It gets compiled down to Missile or Microsoft Intermediate Language. What is the intermediate language of Java? Is there a name to it?
yes, it's called bytecode. So
Okay.
it's Java bytecode.
All
Yeah,
right.
I think the proper name is like intermediate language. I think Microsoft took like the name from computer science literature and just like, let's go with that. Whereas Java has to be different.
Mm. Cool.
Um,
Cool.
yeah,
Uh,
so the address the question again because we kind of got distracted. Uh, so if you're writing like in vanilla, it is pretty verbose. On Android, at least, there's a lot of code generation using annotation process or or I guess so like you put attributes on things. This would be the .NET name, and then a code generator scans your code and then generates a bunch of boilerplate helper classes, which you can then use to do a lot of the way of flow of the boilerplate you'd normally have to be doing.
Okay. Yeah, I auto-generated code. I don't know. I have a love-hate relationship with it because I always have to do a little bit of ceremony with my code coverage. I don't want
Yep.
I don't want that generated code to be included in my code coverage report. And so I don't know. I find it somewhat challenging to make sure that that doesn't show up when I'm trying to like scrutinize my code to make sure that it's doing exactly what I want, and there's nothing that I'm not aware of. But yeah, what's the and this is a conversation. It's not really me interviewing you. I'm just talking to you as a complete stranger. Hopefully, we could get to know each other. But
Yeah.
what's the tech like in Australia? Is there like a let me silence my phone. Is there like a Silicon Valley in Australia? Um, like is there a specific city where there's just a lot of software being built and a lot of just things being done out there?
Yeah, Australia, I guess, is a little bit different to the US in that we only have like 24, I think, million people, and like since like the turn of the last century, like agriculture just doesn't exist for people anymore. So everyone now lives in cities. So something like 80 something percent of Australia's population like lives in like 3 or 4 cities. So I guess, yeah. So I don't think it really matters where you go. Sydney is like Australia's biggest city, so probably Sydney then Melbourne in terms of places where you want to go to find a job doing programming. But you can find like programming related stuff in the slightly smaller cities and even kind of large country towns, I guess.
And how far is whenever I think of Australia, I think of like New Zealand. New Zealand is like somewhat nearby, or I thought there was some type of relationship between the two countries.
Yeah, there is like Australia and New Zealand are fairly kind of tight politically. In fact, even though New Zealand is actually a separate country, New Zealand appears as a state in the Australian Constitution because when we wrote our Constitution, we wrote it in such a way that if ever New Zealand ever wanted to join the Australia as a country, they can because we've already said yes, like 150 years ago or something.
Okay, so Australia would protect New Zealand if there were ever a war waged upon New Zealand. That's what I assume. But they're
Yeah,
allies.
yeah. So Australia, New Zealand, um, yeah, they're not as close as you would think. I think it's like a 4 hour flight from Sydney. So
Oh, okay, that's
yeah,
pretty far.
yeah, I think it's because like the way projections work in maps. So if you like look at like the square map of the world, it always looks a bit weird.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I've been trying to pick up F sharp for like a year, and like, I think I'm beyond beginner, but I'm not confident enough to say I'm intermediate. But I'm not sure if you listen to .NET Rocks, but I was on .NETRocks.com Wednesday, and I was
Yep.
telling them about building mobile applications using Visual Studio and Xamarin. And I listened to it. I listened to my episode on there, and I was like, "Yo, I sound like I know what I'm talking about." So it was pretty cool. So
Yeah.
have you ever they have yeah, they have NDC Sydney in
Yep.
over there. And are there any other like international conferences for software development, or is that essentially like the conference to go to in Australia?
So NDC Sydney only started this year. The main kind of major developer conference I think has been going for like 10 years is called YOW. So they host that in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. And they have a few other kind of more specialized conferences. They even have one in Perth, which is on the like the west coast of Australia. And to give you just suspect, I think the Australia is actually slightly wider than the United States.
Really?
I think so. I think I've seen
Oh,
projections where they kind of projected over. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, like, I don't know that much about Australia. I watch Animal
Um,
Planet, and like, that's pretty much what I know about Australia. Like, it's I'll be scared to like go to the backyard. I'll be scared to like I would be scared to go to a picnic. I feel like you get bit by a spider, and that's like the death penalty. Like, it's over.
no,
No.
I think the last spider-related death, the only was I think in like 1976 in terms of relation to people being bitten in cars. So more people have died in car crashes from freaking out that there's a spider in the car
Yeah,
than from
yeah.
the spider itself. In fact, it's kind of a bit morbid, but like I think it was something like more people, like in terms of like tourists, die on average from going out into the desert without enough water and supplies than from like any of the animals combined.
Wow. Oh, that's not comfortable. Of course, I. Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. I
Yeah,
where is the
there's
Outback at? Or is it everywhere where cities aren't?
so I don't think I've ever been to the outback because I live on the I pretty much live within like a few kilometers of the ocean most of my life. And the outback is you got to go past what's called the Blue Mountains, which runs up a lot of the kind of New South Wales.
Yeah.
And then even then you got to drive for like a few more hours before you can even start getting to somewhere where you can call the outback. At least that's from where I am. That seems to be the case.
And that's pretty much no man's land. Like they don't do they even have like a wildlife law enforcement agency looking over it, or it's
Yeah.
go
So
there at your own I don't know, like what's the disclaimer I'm looking
there
for?
are risks.
Yeah, 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 risk. Thank you. I'm kind of tired.
Yeah. No. So I don't actually know what the Australian equivalent of the like EPA would be, but I think we do have one. There are like national parks and like there's parts of like the Australian outback which are really weird. There's I believe a type of fish which I think hibernates or it lays its eggs in the soil, and because the ground will dry up completely, and then there'll be like a rainy season in the middle of like what looks like a desert, and suddenly there'll be like lakes and fish and birds everywhere, and it's like this last week there was nothing.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, was it just talking about Australia? Was it our plants have actually evolved to require fire? So every summer, most of the country like sort of catches on fire.
Oh, that doesn't seem like it's healthy.
It's not too bad. They're getting better at kind of burning off early in the spring when there's not too much fuel built up on the ground, so that the plants can do their thing and not threaten all the squishy humans.
Okay, okay. I don't know anything about Australia, so it's like I was just curious about it. I was meaning to when I was living in the Philippines, I just knew I was going to like go to Australia a couple of times, but I never did it. I'm not sure if you guys are in the
Yeah.
same time zone or not. If it's 10 after 6 p.m. in
Mhm.
United or East Coast of United States, what time is it over there?
It's just on 10 a.m.
10. Okay. Uh,
Yeah. So we're plus 11. I think you're -4 at the moment.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was on the strip like an hour ago, and I think I texted you like 2 hours ago, like, "Yo, I'm not ready to go home yet. Like, can we postpone this session we're going to do?" And you're like, "Sure. What time?" I'm like, "Oh, cool." I thought you were going to get mad at me, but I was out, man. It's really nice outside, and so I was just posted up, eating, drinking, and talking to people. But
So it's fall where you are now. So like, what's I guess winter like? In you're in Miami, right?
yeah, I'm in Miami, Florida. So like there's a winter, there's just no snow. Um, have you experienced snow before?
Yeah, the first time I experienced snow was when I was living in Detroit, and it just started snowing outside.
Hold
Yeah,
up, you lived in the United States?
only for 5 months. So like my first job out of uni involved going to Detroit, Michigan for about
Detroit's
five
not a
months.
nice place.
It
Detroit's
wasn't too
rough.
bad. It wasn't too
Were
bad
you in
because
the
we were
city
like
or were you in the suburbs?
right in the city. Um,
Yeah.
the way that kind of people painted it to me was that if you're right in the city, you're fine. If you're more than like 20 miles out of the city, you're probably fine. So it ends up being like this kind of like donut of death.
Did you are you familiar with 8 Mile?
Yeah, in general, like
Yeah, Eminem
only
had a
by
movie,
name.
but there's also a road called 8 Mile over there. Nah, I used to drive from Cleveland, Ohio to Detroit, Michigan, um, from time to time, and I would go up there to gamble. This was before the Great Recession that the United States had from like 2008 to like
Yep.
2010, and so it was like yeah, it was like a 3 hour drive. I would go to Motor City, I would go to MGM, and I would go to Greektown, and those are the three casinos that I would frequent. But
Yeah.
besides that, there was nothing else in Detroit that I was interested in. Nothing else in
I,
Cleveland either. But
I think I went there at the end of 2000, no, the beginning of 2012.
okay,
And when I got there, like in January, and in the 5 months from when I got there to when I left, I think I saw an entire street go from nothing to full of cafes.
really? So
Yeah.
it's starting to return. Like they're starting to people are investing in that city again. Is that what you're saying? It looked like?
Well, I was there for 5 months, so I don't know what it's like now.
Okay.
Um,
All right.
and it seems like lots of stuff shuts down in winter just because it's so like cold that no one goes outside. Like there's something that like never occurred to me, but like it's so cold that if you don't dry your hair enough, it can actually crack and come off. And I'm like, that's not real, right?
No, man, you think about like way up north in Canada, man. It's not a tundra. Detroit's not a tundra, but I
I don't know.
mean,
I walked outside one day and I forgot like a beanie or like a fairy hat or something, and it was like 10 minutes from my apartment, and I was like, I can't feel my ears anymore.
yeah,
But across the street there was a drugstore, so I went and bought like a a hat with like the flappy ears and things. And I was like, not only was my ears warm, but I now had this like comically like flappy kind of lumberjack hat.
so do you miss Detroit now? Now that you're back in Australia?
Uh, I don't know. I didn't mind Detroit. It was definitely interesting because like you'd like go down one street and there'd be like BMWs. You go down the next street and there'd be like burnt out houses, and it's just
Yep,
like,
yep.
so if I go down this street, I'm fine. If I go down this street, I'll get mugged,
I think that's
and
every
they'll be
city
right
though.
next to each other.
That's like every city, I think.
Really?
Cleveland's the
I
same way. Miami's the same way. In Cleveland, healthcare is the major industry, and so you'll see a bad neighborhood, but there's some type of like tax incentive that 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 the city has set up with the hospital, and so they'll get doctors to move into the neighborhood, and you see like a crack house, vacant house, really nice house, crack house, really nice house, crack house, really nice house, really nice house, crack house, crack house, and so the police will just patrol up and down the street, but they're slowly taking like the hood and converting it to an affluent neighborhood. So I mean that's their strategy. But yeah, I mean I'm back in Cleveland. I don't know. Did you ever go to any other city? Did you ever visit Cleveland from Detroit? Because it's a 3 hour drive. I mean we're neighbors. It's just a lake that's in between us. Like I think we're like
Um,
90 miles away if it weren't for the lake that we have to drive around.
yeah, I don't think I didn't really travel much in the US. I couldn't really convince any of like the colleagues I was working with to go to some places. And when they did decide they want to go to New York, it wasn't a good weekend for me. So the only place I went to was um, the
Windsor.
Bloomington in Indianapolis.
Okay.
No, wait, in Indiana. Indianapolis is the main city, right? But I did go to Windsor twice. Once to see Penn and Teller. So they were at the Caesar Casino there. So that was fun.
Yeah, I would go there to gamble too. I heard like, I mean, it's essentially Detroit, except it's not. Like it's right across the river, and
It
I heard it's like night and day the difference between Windsor and Detroit. Um, but
Yeah, for me, it was kind of a real kind of, I guess we call culture shock because I'd stand on the river and there'd be like the Coast Guard going up and down the river, and I'm like, that's another country.
yeah, yeah.
like,
I thought there was
like
some. I thought it was like Windsor is like the only city that there's some little known fact about Windsor in regards to its location, in which it's actually a city that is southern than another city in the United States. And I'm not talking about Canada. I'm talking about mainland. I gotta figure it out, but I don't know. It was a little known trivia fact,
yeah,
but
though I did go by myself to Toronto for an entire weekend,
I like Toronto.
and
Toronto's live.
yeah,
I like Toronto.
that was fun. But like the one of the managers at the company was like, "I hear you going there by yourself on the weekend, and you know that's a really dangerous thing to do." And I'm like, "We're in Detroit.
The whole city? Oh yeah, Detroit is like hood.
how how is Toronto more dangerous?"
You see what Detroit did to Eminem? You know who Eminem right is, right? The rapper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I saw the movie.
Yeah. Nah, I
So
love
yeah,
Toronto.
that was fun. I literally just went there and walked everywhere, and I went on like a harbor cruise, you know, like pointing out these like apartments. Like these apartments are like super expensive at like what do you say, like $250,000, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's about half the price of what an apartment in Sydney is.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's pretty cheap for a condo. Um,
Yeah,
these condos, like this condo that I'm inside right now, I mean, it goes for what 700,000.
yep.
Um, but the thing is, it's like I live on the beach, so it's like, oh, it's expensive down here. I don't know. Like from Cleveland, I thought the whole world was in poverty, and then in Miami, like I swear there's like a million millionaires. Like I don't know where all this money comes. Well, actually, I do. There's a lot of drug money out down here, but it's it's weird how like it's kind of like what you said. When I was living in Cleveland, I saw Toyotas and Hondas. Right, I come to Miami, I didn't even know what a Maserati was. You know what a Maserati is?
No,
Exactly, right? Neither did I. In Miami, you see like things that you don't even recognize as cars. They look like spaceships, and they just have four wheels on them. So like I see Rolls Royces, Maseratis, Ferraris, Lamborghinis. Like it's like night and day. And I didn't know like there's parts of America that like has a lot of money in it. I mean, I knew New York did, but I don't know. It's just weird how like you go from one environment to another, and it's like polar opposites. So even in this country, it is. That's interesting, though. So what possessed you to get into functional programming?
I was working in Canberra, which is actually Australia's capital city, and I was carpooling with one of my colleagues to and from work, and he was talking about Scala, and I was like, wait, so and immutability, and I'm like, wait, how can you have a program where you can't change the data? Like, if you can't change the data, like,
Yeah,
how do you do anything?
That's crazy talk. Like, who does that? Freaking
And
hipsters.
this concept of like changing data was so alien to me. I just couldn't understand what how a program could function when you can't change anything. And it never occurred to me that you don't actually change anything; you just make new things, and the old stuff just gets discarded. And so I did a Coursera course on Scala, which I think at that point was run by Martin Odersky, who was one of the language creators. I think he's the main guy behind Scala. And yeah, I just kind of did a bunch of functional programming courses. So it's like Scala, ML, and I kind of picked up a book on F sharp, but I'd a few years ago kind of decided to do away with Windows and go everything Linux, and now I've kind of gone everything Mac, and it was
Traitor.
just too hard. I have a command line that works.
Oh, okay. Honestly, I was
Um,
struggling for 2 days with getting Visual Studio 2017 RC. I was trying to get the Visual Studio Android emulator running, and I had some horrible issues with some Hyper-V manager thing I had to do on a command line. But yeah. I understand. Yeah, I don't want to relearn. I don't want to have to learn another operating system. I'm listening. So anyway,
no,
you visited it, and then you decided to put it down, and now you're returning back to it.
yeah, I've kind of been trying to return back to it for ages. It's been a little bit hard, kind of, um, or at least it kind of feels a bit hard to find a lot of the functional kind of jobs. Over the last, I think, year and a half, that seems to have changed. But yeah, I don't know. I've tried to do F sharp and Xamarin, and on Xamarin Studio that was quite painful to the point of where I spent probably a few weekends working out what the hash codes and the project XML meant, and then wrote a Yeoman generator so I could actually create F sharp PCLs on Mac without having to go into Visual Studio, create them, and then copy them over, and then beat them into submission.
Oh wow, I didn't really have that issue.
Yeah, funny.
It just worked in Visual Studio. I don't know how to
Yeah,
use a Mac. I tried, but I just haven't invested enough time to really internalize the user interface of a Mac. But so on your T-shirt it says Monad. Did you experiment with monads in your development? Like I don't know anything about monads at all. Um, have, how deep are you in functional programming? Are you like me? Or are you a little bit more advanced or way more advanced? What are you?
I think you're a bit ahead of me in terms of actual kind of practically doing things. I really haven't been able to find the time to do a lot of kind of F sharp or Haskell on the side. I went to Yale have a so Yale's a big conference I was talking about before. Have a functional conference up in Brisbane.
Okay.
So I went to like, a workshop there where we're using Haskell to do things like church encoding. So built. So if you're not familiar with church encoding, the idea is that you don't have any primitives except for the function, and you build everything out of the function. So you build
So
primitives.
everything is functions, and there's no such thing
Yeah.
as a local variable or a local value that gets declared.
Uh,
I mean,
I don't know. I didn't get that far. I
the
got halfway. I got
what?
halfway through the work, but there's no such thing as primitives. So you don't have like Boolean as a primitive in the language when you're doing church encoding doesn't exist. So you create a Boolean by having a function that is the true Boolean and a function that is the
Yeah, I
false
get it.
Boolean. Yep, and then you implement everything out of that. So
That
that
sounds
was
cool.
yeah, that was fun because I think towards the end of the workshop you were starting to kind of build things which were monadic. So you had your what's the thing? You have the functions have to be commutative. it was like commutative, associative, and yeah, I can't remember. I can't remember what the definition of a monad is.
No, I don't know
But
either.
yeah,
My understanding is it's uh, a functional technique to basically entertain state or no, not state, but side effects. But I probably butchered that because I haven't really messed around with it. And then F sharp,
I think that yeah,
okay. I was going to say in F
yeah.
sharp, I mean, you still have object oriented support, full object oriented support. So I really didn't need to figure out a monad and how to use it for that programming language specifically. But in Haskell, I think you do. I don't.
Yeah,
Haskell is
yeah.
purely functional.
There is an escape hatch. I think you can specify something as unsafe, and the Haskell compiler just like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And you're like, "Yes, do it," and it will actually kind of break out of the monad, but you don't really want to do it. But Haskell, as far as I understand, it won't compile your program and it'll tell you why your structures are wrong. Whereas F sharp is like you can get close to a monad, but you don't actually know unless you sit down and prove it using tests. Whereas the Haskell type system is able to determine whether the thing you've written conforms to the monad. I think the yeah, that's as far as I can get.
Have you have you investigated F star?
No, but I did listen to that podcast quite recently. I found it quite interesting that the language doesn't actually compile and run. You take the F star, you prove that it's valid, and then you output the program to either OCaml or F sharp. And I was like, huh.
Well, you just confused me, but it's okay. I
So
oh,
if F star thinks what you wrote is fine, you can then, because F star doesn't actually have a runtime, you have to actually have it output what it thinks the source of the program that you want to run to F sharp and then compile the F sharp.
oh wow. I know it's a very serious functional language that's like I don't know if it's the truth, but like it's very, very like academic-y, researchy, like you got to be like a mathematician somewhat to really be successful with it. That's the belief system that I have. I'm not sure if it's
Um,
the
I
truth.
don't, I don't think so. I think it's only academic in the sense that it's like not something that you'd probably put in production, or if you did in a very sparing manner, because F star is, as far as I understand, similar to things like Idris, where it's dependently typed. Not only do you define the type system, but you define the behaviors of the program. So you have a function that takes a list and it looks at the first two elements and then returns something. So the F star will try to work out, given what it knows about your program, is it possible for your function to receive a list that is not satisfactory, that it can't actually perform its function?
Yeah, and so that part I'm attracted to. The whole like
Mm.
make illegal states unrepresentable, like that seems like it it can actually be implemented successfully in Haskell. You said Elm or F star. So like an example
Mm-hmm.
that I'm really interested in is here's an example. I
Yep.
have a function that only takes positive numbers. Okay, meaning well, including zero, meaning like zero
Yep.
or one, it doesn't matter, to n, right? But it can't be like -1, it can't be -1,000, it can't be -1 billion. It can only be positive, right? And so
Yep.
I look at F star as it, from what I heard, F star has that support. You said dependent types, which I don't know. I don't know honestly what that means. but supposedly there's a way that you can code
Sorry.
your types with constraints where
Yep.
you can say that this type will only support a value within this range theoretically. That's my understanding of it. I could be wrong. So
Yeah, I think the idea is to like prove the interaction between that function and everything that calls it, so that it yeah, so it will try and prove that no matter what values it passes to the calling, what values the calling functions get called with. Oh god, I have to think recursively.
good luck, because I get lost when I try to think about it.
Yeah, so I think the idea is to prove that everyone that calls you will conform to that requirement. So that if you're calling if you're bringing in some IO, not only do you make sure that the IO call is safe, but you also make sure that when you get the data back, you validate at the edge that every constraint that you've defined for that data to be passed to, that data satisfies.
Yeah, I just I would dig into it if it had like some type of interop with .NET, meaning
Yeah,
I would investigate F star and start programming with it if I could actually start calling libraries in .NET versus my backend or on a server is running F star code and my client has to rely on web services in order to execute logic written in F star, which I mean, I guess that's okay. It's just I like to be able to have the freedom to have libraries interact with other libraries that may not be written in the same language. So like if it runs on the CLR, great, but I don't. What does F star run on?
it doesn't. Remember, it doesn't actually have. It doesn't actually compile and run. You have to have it output F sharp or a camel code, and then you compile the F sharp or a camel.
Oh, so I can write F. I can build a mobile app with Xamarin and F star then, based on what you just said.
Yeah. So go check the docs because,
I'm
and
not
just
smart
double check
enough.
that
I'm
I
not smart enough.
go check the docs and make sure what I like the what I'm saying is still true and actually valid, and I'm not just dreaming these things up. But yeah, possibly you could take like some F star and compile out a binary for a dependency for a project. I don't know if I build the entire thing in F star because I suspect you'd lose like all your tooling support because F star would be like, I didn't know what these things are.
Well,
Um,
you lose half of
but yeah,
it with F sharp. I mean, if you're into like static analysis and all that stuff.
yeah, that's been a really interesting thing doing like Android with like Java and Kotlin and using Google's IDE Android Studio because the sense and static analysis that it does in comparison to Xamarin is just amazing. Um, so in a lot of the Android library, Google is kind of sprinkling these nullability annotations through it. So they'll specify whether the parameters or the return types are nullable or not, and then the tooling will actually check to see if you're doing null guards or passing nulls and where you shouldn't be. So they're kind of retrofitting static time null path analysis into Android development.
Well, you could do if you're doing Android, theoretically you can build an Android application with Scala, right? And then you don't have to worry about nulls at all for the most part, theoretically, right?
Yeah, you can, and I have seen people build Android applications using Scala. The problem with doing that is that Scala rewrote the entire like standard library for like the Java runtime in Scala. So when you import Scala, you're bringing something like 20 megabytes of dependencies with you,
Okay.
and Yeah, so Android's also got a method limit of um, like 65,000 methods because it only uses 16-bit method pointers.
Yo, what IDE do you use when you're doing Java related development?
So the only Java I've really ever done professionally has been for Android,
Okay,
and
so you use
that
Android
uses
Studio.
yeah,
Do they have unit
yeah,
test support as like a first party member in Android
yeah,
Studio? Because when I was trying to look into Android Studio a couple years ago, I didn't see like unit testing as a default feature of it. I could be wrong, but I didn't see it.
yeah. So I think Android Studio is like 2.5 years old. So if you looked at it 2 years ago, it was probably like pre 1.0.
Okay.
So it definitely has kind of first class support for running unit tests now. In fact, I believe, yeah, so the current version actually has like a test generator for like integration tests. So you hit start, it launches your emulator, you do the things you want in the UI, and then you hit stop and it
Yeah,
will
it
take
has
in the.
that. I know it has that, but I'm talking about like unit tests where like
Yeah,
you don't have to launch the actual application. You can just execute code that's headless. Um, that part.
yeah. So you don't need the IDE to do that, but you can have the IDE launch the test runner. So was it JUnit is the kind of major unit testing library in Java,
Hmm.
and that works, and you can actually launch it from inside the Android Studio. The biggest problem with doing unit tests in Android is actually writing your application in such a way that you don't have references to like the Android namespaces, because as soon as you have an reference to the Android namespace, you can't, or there are a few ways, but it becomes incredibly difficult to actually run unit tests without needing the Android runtime to be there.
Okay. Well, I know nothing about that space for the most part, but I'm a hardcore TDD guy, so I can't I can't
Yeah,
write code professionally without writing automated tests. It actually guides me to how to write the code. But yeah, so like Android Studio turned me off because I wasn't able to quickly identify unit testing as part of the development experience. So good stuff.
yeah. Um, I've found it quite difficult to kind of get unit testing into an application because it becomes incredibly easy to accidentally get into the situation where you can't run unit tests because you're referencing something from the Android namespace. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and like experienced Android developers, I think, still find it a real challenge.
So out of 30, did you say 36 million? How many people live in Australia? How many documented people live in Australia?
Uh, yeah, so I think the last census that they published that I read was like 24 million people or something.
All right. Oh, that's the size of a really, really big city. All right. So you got 24
Yeah.
million.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the demand of a software developer in that country? Like, I mean, maybe you haven't even looked it up, or maybe you don't care. But like, is it easy? You lived here in the States. Like, are developers a dime a dozen in Australia like they are in the United States?
I would say demand, at least in Sydney, is outstrip supply. Atlassian, if you've ever used things like Jira and Confluence and any of
Yeah.
that stuff, I think 4 months ago came to like the Android user group and said, "We're hiring 30 developers." I'm like, what? So Atlassian and typical kind of for their form. When they start a team, they really start a team. So they just went from nothing to I think like immediately going right. We want 30 people
That's crazy. And so the Australian dollar is stronger than the U.S. dollar. That's more of
a
a
weekend.
question. Oh, okay,
So the Australian dollar to the US is I think like 73 cents.
okay. That's for whatever reason I thought you guys had a strong dollar compared to the United States.
It was
Um,
stronger when I was in Detroit, so it was really great. So like I'd go to like an ATM and withdraw a bunch of money, and the difference in the currency conversion meant that even after fees, I ended up with actually slightly more money than what I paid for in Australian dollars.
okay, because I'm curious what a senior like I'm senior I'm curious what a senior developer in Australia would make compared to the United States. So a senior developer in the United States would make like 100,000. I say that. In
Yep.
Australia, would it be the same, or because of demand, or whatever math you do to figure out, the equivalent of what a senior would make here? I'm kind of curious what that looks like. My cousin, I mean, he lives over there, and he said he makes a lot of money, compared to what he would make down here. But he does like HVAC, which I guess is some type of like air conditioning, heating, whatever that stuff is. But yeah, and I think he was making like $40 an hour doing that, which is like is
Yeah.
pretty good
So
to work
I
in a
I
trade
think
and do that.
yeah, the what people get paid as base wages for a lot of things is quite high. In terms of a senior software engineer, I think 100 would be pretty easy. I've seen jobs and um, recruiters harass me with offering me salaries of like 110 to 140.
And you said no?
Yeah, well, pretty much because I get like something like a dozen, like half a dozen to a dozen calls or emails from recruiters a week,
Are they
which is
offshore? The recruiters that are trying to contact you?
no, they're all locally here.
Okay. 'Cause my
I think if they're
my phone
oh
blows up with offshore recruiters. Like they call me like every 20 minutes. Um, okay.
yeah, no, it's recruiters get paid I think between 10 and 20% of what your annual salary is as a commission. So if you're getting 100, they and you get past probation, they will get the 10 to $20,000 for finding you and putting you in that position.
That's pretty good. So
Yeah.
like, oh, I should be a recruiter.
There's actually an agency which isn't too bad in Australia where all the recruiters are like ex developers or just been like, wait, you make how much?
Uh-huh. Well, maybe I should just be a developer and then I just place other developers. You make me rethink my business model. I'm serious.
I
So
I can't imagine it doesn't take a small amount of time because I I given that how much I reject them and how much I know other people reject them, like for every like probably like 100 people you like call, you might only get like one person to say like yes, and then you that one person says yes, still has to get hired and get past probation.
and
So
you have to be able to make money off of them. Like they get upset with me because like I said, my hourly rate is high, and so like they get frustrated, because they feel as if they can't compete with other staffing firms, because they're like,
yep,
what's your hourly rate? And if I have to go to another city, meaning if I have to leave Miami to do a contract, I'll say $95 an hour.
yeah,
But here locally in Miami, I'll do $85 an hour, right? And yeah, that means if I go to another city or another state, I still have to pay rent here in Miami and pay rent in whatever studio apartment that I have to render
Yeah.
service. So, but they don't care about that. I'm getting pretty frustrated. I want to just work I'm gonna get a secret clearance and just do government work because I don't want to compete with everybody else anymore. I want to be in my own little group where we don't have to compete with everybody else. So I'll keep my hourly rate up, and then I'll probably go to like 105 an hour or something. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I don't know.
Australia is looking to hire some U.S. developers.
Probably. Is you probably like if you want to like come over to Australia, it's
I'll do
probably
that.
not. Yeah. Uh, I don't think you'd find much in terms of like contract work because like if you're doing contracting, hiring, if you're hiring from overseas, most people tend to go to like the cheaper kind
Yep.
of parts of the world. But if you want to hire someone permanently locally, you could probably kind of find someone who's looking for the skills that you have to is willing to pay for like the visa and fly you over. But yeah, you'd probably have
What's
to be here for a while.
what's the dominant what's the dominant stack or ecosystem in Australia? Does it depend on the city? Like for example, is it .NET or is it Java, or is it kind of like United States where like East Coast it may be .NET, Midwest it may be .NET, but West Coast it's like dominated by Java. Like what's it like out there? Is there a is most of the market based on Java technologies for building software?
I don't know about other cities. I know in Sydney at least the Java community I think is slightly bigger. It's probably actually a lot bit bigger than the .NET community because a lot of the major banks are in Sydney, and all the banks kind of back to Java, I guess, like ages and ages ago. So I think in terms of size, I'd say probably Java, JavaScript, and then .NET in terms of the big free technology stacks.
Mm.
Yeah. I don't know. It's kind of interesting because from my perspective, the US seems a lot more diverse in terms of what people are using and where.
Yeah. And so Microsoft appeared to observe. Okay, so let me start over. My opinion, right, which is often flawed, is Microsoft started losing Microsoft started losing market share in which to build with .NET costs money, you know.
Yeah.
Um, like to build professionally using like enterprise tools in .NET. Like I think Visual Studio Enterprise, I thought it was like $12,000 or $13,000 for a license.
Yep.
Um, and so you multiply that by like you know a dozen developers or 20 developers in a department, and it adds up, you know. And so I think what started happening was kind of a backlash, and this is just what I think, in which a lot of shops, or maybe a substantial number of shops, said, "Yo, the between license for Visual Studio, SQL Server, BizTalk Server, all these different Microsoft technologies. Oh, this is costing a lot of money. On the Java side, this stuff appears to be free. Why are we spending all this money on .NET support when there's just enough of a community backing in this open source, and we don't have to pay for all these licenses. You may have to pay for support, but you don't have to pay for like the actual licenses. And so I think more and more companies started going to the Java ecosystem, and then Microsoft kind of like woke up, and they started doing, I guess, the .NET Core and .NET Standard, and so now C Sharp runs everywhere from iOS, Android to now Linux, etc. That's what I think. I could be wrong, but yeah, they're
Yeah,
trying. I'm listening.
I think the cost has a definite impact, especially if like you're a startup. So you have a very limited amount of money, and I don't know if I was running a business if I could justify to myself $12,000 per developer, and especially like if I need to suddenly double the size of my team because the investment demands that I get something done quicker. I don't know how, even though I'm working in a startup, I don't know how you'd organize the business side of things. But that's suddenly like doubling your team from 8 people to 16 means that, like, eight is like, was it $100,000 just in terms of licensing?
Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah,
I guess I would have to discriminate. I would take my like 20% of the developers on my team that generate 80% of the results. And I was like, yo, these developers, they get an enterprise edition. All my other developers, they get that community edition. And I'll just discriminate. It is what it is. Like, yo, they're rock stars. We're gonna hook them up with the best support because these are our true soldiers. Everybody else, you should aspire to be like them, right? It's kind of like the social class here in the United States of America. Like that's the behavior.
maybe.
But I don't know. There's a lot of philosophy and ignorance on my part.
Yeah,
But
because I think that the chain of the causality is kind of rather deep, especially if you like then start to question what is it that universities use, and universities
Java,
must be like, yeah, like they're probably just like,
it's free.
well, .NET we can get free licenses for, but then we have to like deal with paperwork. I don't know how much paperwork involved getting a university license, but Java is just like just tell them to install Java.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's the same thing with .NET Community Edition. You just install it, and then you start getting hooked, and then like depending on how much of a craftsman you are, you're gonna want that enterprise. You're gonna want that code map. You're gonna want code metrics feature. You're gonna want what is it? They have a tool for identifying clones. It's called code clones or something like that. There's a lot of features in Visual Studio that just supports the automation of delivering higher quality code.
Yeah,
And maybe Eclipse, which I never learned how to use. I used to use NetBeans when I was in college because the core programming language at the university I went to was Java, and so I had
yeah.
NetBeans and I was building that stuff. Applets. They still have applets, or is that like so 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
Applets are the ones that run the browser, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they're a thing anymore. At least,
Okay.
well,
That's how long it's been.
someone's probably using them because someone's probably invested a lot of money into it, and the product still works. Um, yeah, what was that? God, I completely forgot what. Oh, right, yeah. So I don't see particularly a great deal of value in all this kind of instrumentation built into my IDE. Like it's great in, I think, smaller teams, or like I guess you do a lot of contracting, so it probably helps quite a lot there. Um, I prefer to try and push as much of that kind of instrumentation into like my CI setup as possible, because then I run a little bit locally and then push it up, and the CI tells me hopefully fairly quickly. Like if it's a slow CI, it's probably even worse. What's happening, because then I don't need to invest a lot of time and effort into having each machine be set up the way I need it to be set up to do the code analysis, and the CI is just hopefully immutable and is always going to kind of do the code analysis correctly and give back reports that.
Yeah, I just think I would have thought that it would be cheaper to catch it faster at the developer scope versus at the CI scope. Um,
Mhm.
and then especially when you're working with teams, like I'm a disciplined developer, like but when you work with teams and you work with people that have limited experience, or some people that They don't care how they write their code. Like it's really important to tame it, and I think you have to like tame code like it's a beast, or else it's going to become technical debt as soon as they do that check-in. And so like down here, I mean, everywhere, I'm sure, everywhere, legacy code is being written on greenfield projects, right? Based on the definition of legacy code, it's code that don't have
Yeah,
that do not have test support. And so like you have developers that just straight off the floodgates on a brand new project. They're working on some application and it's already untestable. It's already in order to in order to even test the code, they have to launch an entire application, and I'm not with that. So I use a lot of stack analysis in harmony with my automated tests, so that after the main foundation is laid, the scaffolding, whatever you want to call it becomes a lot easier just to build, extend software. So that's just me. I'm a
yeah.
militant when it comes to. Yeah, I'm very
No,
disciplined, and I like doing things like
yeah.
very structured.
No, that's good. I think like once you get beyond that foundation part, if you can also get the foundation for your CI set up so that people can't actually check in code unless it passes the standards that you've set down in the foundation.
Yeah,
I think once you constrain people to working in that environment, you will force them to either kind of bring up that what they're doing to the standards that what I guess you I as like the architect in this scenario has set forward, so that people can't kind of start to pollute the application in ways that is not satisfactory. So that the CI server goes, we've lost 5% code coverage. I'm not committing anything until you people bring up the code coverage back to the standard that the architect has set forward.
yeah, and then there will have to be some additional testing to validate that they didn't try to cheat on their tests, um, which I see a lot. For them to satisfy code coverage uh,
Yeah,
requirements, and
I
so
suspect
whether
that's more ignorance than actually malice. There's probably a few people who would do it more out of kind of malevolence, but I suspect a lot of it comes down to the fact that it's like, oh, write a test. I'm like, I've never written tests before. How do I do this? So as well as having the CI there, I think it's also important to have people who can sit down with members of a team and mentor them and communicate effectively with them as to what value this is and why it's effective. Like you go to meetups all the time and someone talks about testing and someone stands up and it's like, well, testing takes time, so like I need to just code more. And like, no.
yeah, that's the wrong mentality. So here's my question to you. Um, Apparently I'm strange. I'm weird because I'm the only person that cares about this. But I mean, as we talk about this, you don't think it's strange that the majority of people that are being hired as professionals, they don't know how to test their work? You don't
No,
feel
but
like that's really awkward out of all the other um, professionals in
I
other sectors? Like we're the only ones where you don't have to test your work. Just just have a good feeling that it works. That's enough. You don't have to back it up. You don't have to prove it.
yeah, it's kind of hard because like the people hiring us a lot of the time like businesses, they don't know what is good code because like that's not their job. Their job is to make the business successful from a kind of financial and management standpoint. And it's up to, unfortunately, it's up to us as a community to educate our peers as to the value that test automation brings, and to just bring kind of our colleagues up to the standards that the kind of more fast-moving members of our community have achieved, and kind of like point to them and be like, look, Facebook is like a really extreme example of like deploying it for like 3 seconds and they're fine and they don't have bugs because they have all this quality assurance that's not driven by humans who are fallible and tired and
Yeah, you automate
they,
everything, and this is my biggest pet peeve. Okay, if you noticed on job postings when they're looking for developers, very rarely do you see a job posting for a software engineer. You see job postings for software developers, but you don't see very rarely where you see a job posting for a software engineer. Okay, but for some reason, there's no such thing as a software engineer, but we have software craftsmen. A software craftsman is a true software engineer, but software craftsmen have this like taboo label on them because they're like prima donnas and they believe in producing their software a certain type of way that the industry doesn't embrace or isn't proud of because they think it's too personal. But that's essentially what a software engineer is, right? When you leverage tools within your IDE to scrutinize your code, when you're taking when you are capturing metrics about your code base and then putting forth the action based on what you have captured to make your code better, like they call that a software craftsman, but really it's a goddamn engineer, man. But for whatever reason, they don't want to use that term because then that means that if you're a software engineer, then you're required to do that. And so they change the branding. They say you're a software craftsman because it's you that are doing this, and it's not a software engineer, which sounds like more of a standard. So a craftsman is one that goes out of their way to take the light to produce something that is of a higher quality. A software engineer is really the same thing, right? Except if they're a software engineer, then that's kind of like a standard title, engineer, and there's
yeah,
expectations, right? But a
yeah,
craftsman, it's not expected. It's just on a craftsman's it's what a craftsman does because they go above and beyond. But an engineer, it's expected. So they completely changed the the title based on expectations. That's pretty brilliant what the
yeah.
industry did,
Uh,
and no one
it's
no
kind of,
one
yeah.
thinks about it except for me. I know what they did. So, what are your thoughts?
So I don't think the people posting the jobs are software engineers. So I don't know if they fully understand the kind of semantic meanings behind a lot of the words they use. Like you read like job postings and they'll say like we want someone who knows JavaScript and jQuery as a language. It's like look, jQuery is not a language. It's a library.
Oh, my favorite.
So
My favorite from recruiters is, um, how long have you been writing C sharp? And I'll be like 13 years. And they're like, how long have you been doing .NET?
yeah.
13
So
years. Like I get that question all the time in that order. And I'm like,
so
oh,
I wouldn't attribute to like malice to what ignorance can explain in the
yeah.
regards to job postings. And software craftsman is kind of a kind of evil creation of our own because we kind of put it out there as being this kind of really enlightened type of like architect you can bring in. And the recruiters have kind of cottoned on to the idea and they just kind of throw the word around willy nilly now. So I think a few years ago, at least in Australian job postings, they were like, especially for JavaScript, they were using the word ninja. So like JavaScript ninja.
Sounds like hacker to me, but yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like it's kind of hard because I think there's a lot of cargo culting in terms of recruitment and what people do because a lot of the time there's not enough developers. So developers aren't doing the recruitment. So non people with non-developer backgrounds are often brought in to find developers. And
And they just have the
well,
checklist. Do you have, do you have, do you have? And they just check,
yeah.
check, check.
So it's not that they can't be educated to this level. I just don't think it doesn't feel like the industry values that, because if you throw enough like humans at the problem of finding other humans to do software development, then you have a business that makes money. So who cares if they get the terminology wrong? They're finding people jobs. So
Yeah. What's this control room? How do you have you used Google Hangouts before?
not much. I need to look into it more because I need to start doing some live streaming for events, because I go to a lot of meetups, and at the start of the year I went and bought a whole bunch of like cameras and microphones, and I go to a bunch of meetups and actually kind of record them, edit them, and put them online. And a few of them have kind of asked about live streaming some of the events, especially when we have more international speakers come out. And while getting the recording is quite valuable, putting it live as well for other people in Australia, because a lot of the rest of the world is asleep when we're having our meetups or just getting up.
You guys noticed that, huh? Everybody's just
Yeah, I watched some of the Connect conference, and it was I only got to see like the last 2 or 3 sessions, because for me it would start at like 1:45 a.m.
yeah. I never really even considered that before.
Yeah, so Australia is in a really interesting time zone compared to a lot of the rest of the English speaking world, apart from New Zealand and countries which are part of Australia but not.
Yeah,
Um,
you guys live in the future, so whenever it's New Year's Eve, like as soon as I wake up, the fireworks are going off in Sydney. Like, and then
yeah,
24 hours later, the fireworks are going off, in the United States. So,
yeah, yeah, because you're like kind of. I can't think backwards in time. Like whenever I have to like think of something in terms of like US time, I just work out what it is going forward and then subtract the amount of days I need to get back to where I actually am.
yeah. So
So
the time
yeah,
zone difference between United States and Manila, Philippines was like 12 hours. And so
yep.
that was easy for me, when I was living over there and it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I knew like people were leaving the bars and the nightclubs here in the United States or on the East Coast. So it was a lot easier. I didn't really have to do math like you do. But
Well, it's not too bad, because like when you were like 6 p.m., I just like subtracted 8 hours in my head and then minus the day for my
yeah.
own time. So yeah, it's not too bad.
Well, look, we've been talking for like an hour. I'm getting ready to check out. I really appreciate your patience with me as I asked to reschedule. And
Yeah.
we talked about some functional programming. You entertained my me venting about a software craftsman really being a software engineer, but no one really recognizes that. And I learned
Mm.
about the Outback and the
Sort of
PB
like
systems
the
and
problem about asking Australians about the outback is the things that come to our minds. The first thing is like, oh, what's the most dangerous thing I can think of?
well, I think about saltwater crocodiles, great white shark. Well, I know that's not the Outback, but like
Mm.
I don't know. Like here in Miami, we have the Everglades, which is a
Yep.
huge wildlife refuge. But I mean, the only thing that
The,
could kill you is an
yeah.
alligator.
Do you have a lot of snakes?
Well, we got pythons, but we don't have
Oh.
anacondas unless someone flushed it down the toilet
Yeah.
as a pet. But I feel like in Australia, there is literally 1 million ways to die. So
Well, to be honest, I've been living in like ever since I moved away from my parents' house, which is like the last. Well, it was like what, 19 when I went to university. So what? So like almost 10 years. Not quite, a little bit less than 10 years ago. I was like the last time I actually saw a snake in the wild.
oh
Um, yeah, so like you just don't really come across them in like in towns and in the cities. Like my parents kind of live like towards like the outskirts, and even then you'd only occasionally see snakes. Like I think the most fun encounter was when I picked up like the wheelbarrow, and the snake came out of the handle of the wheelbarrow, and I was like, ah.
Oh wow, yeah, that would have scared me. No, I'll watch Discovery Channel. It's a very popular cable network channel in the United States, and they're always like in residential
Yeah.
Australian suburbs. And there's spiders and snakes that bite people, and they get rushed to the hospital, and they end up losing like a hand or they're good at like scaring us and making us not want to picnic or go on like some road trip in Australia somewhere. So
Yeah.
yeah, the media
Probably,
they do the same thing with African countries. They make
yeah.
everybody out to be like they just
There's lions around every corner. Yeah, I
yeah.
don't know. The snakes aren't the snakes aren't too bad. Like I've gone for like walking around like the bush and there'll be like a snake on the path and you just walk around it and it's just like laying there sunbaking. It's like, oh, humans, whatever.
Yeah, we do that with crackheads. Did I just say that? Uh, I
Is
didn't
that
just say
a kind
that.
of
I'm sorry. My mind decided to like
Oh no!
spit that
I went
out.
to San Francisco. I went to San Francisco recently, and like the amount of homeless people is disturbing. Like
Yeah.
there's like clearly people who are kind of meant like just not mentally capable of looking after themselves. Um, and that's
Before or
so.
after they hit the pipe or they shot up some heroin.
It, I don't think it matters.
Yeah.
Because like in Australia, like part of like one of our healthcare laws is like if you mentally can't take care of yourself and there's no one that takes care of you, the state's like, okay, so we're going to treat you, rehabilitate you, and then try and get you back into society. And the Australian healthcare system's like like that entire process is free.
Well, apparently the United States is probably the only developed nation that behaves differently when it comes to rehabilitating people.
Mm,
The programs that we have, it's called prison. That's the truth. It doesn't really
yeah.
rehabilitate. It just makes people worse. Um, if it's white collar crimes, like CEOs and like CFOs and all those people that work in corporate America, when they get convicted of a felony crime, um, embezzling money or whatever, yeah, they might go to a resort that's called prison and they get rehabilitated. But nah, like people like me, you go to prison, you don't get rehabilitated, you get raped. Like there's a lot of messed up things that can go on. So I ain't going to prison. But yeah,
how,
they
did,
they
how did we
and
get
yeah
from
they.
snakes
I'm sorry. What's
to
up?
how did we get from snakes to this?
Oh yeah. I don't know. I went off on a tangent. I'm getting tired, but oh, because I said when you said walk around the snake that's in the middle of the roadway, I'm like, oh, like
Oh, that's
crackheads.
yeah. When
Yeah,
I started talking about San Francisco,
yeah. I'm
um,
sorry. I went off on a tangent. This is what it's like to talk to me. Except you usually expect to have these conversations at the bar, but you have these conversations with me like at any time. So maybe it's a good time to cut this off. So Mitchell,
yeah, no worries.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for responding to my invitation. And most of this has been very productive, except for like the last 5 minutes. So, whatever. Things happen.
So,
Eh.
just like being in the bar, we got to the point where we're now too drunk to form coherent sentences.
What's your Twitter name?
You're following me on. Oh, right, yeah. My Twitter name, so it's Sir underscore Tilbrook, um, which I think I came up with it because it's a pun on the fact that like my family name is like this kind of disemboweled like lord title name. So there's actually like a village in England called Tilbrook.
Oh,
So
okay.
it was this like really tiny like English lord somewhere back in time. So I was kind of poking fun at my like disinherited title.
Sir underscore Tilbrook.
Yeah.
Do you maintain a blog or anything? Is there any other way that people can observe what you're up to?
Twitter's probably the best way. But, if you've ever looked at my Twitter feed, it seems really kind of sporadic, and like I'm always like looking at a whole range of different things. So yeah, no, Twitter's probably the best way.
Okay. Good stuff. Again, I appreciate you recording the conversation with me. The thing with
Likewise.
me is like it's dark now. It's 7:16 p.m. and my body pretty much gets drowsy 2 hours after it gets dark. So in the fall and winter, it gets dark really early. I think it got dark like around maybe 6 o'clock, and so I'm already like, ah, so I'm getting sleepy. But yo, good stuff, and thanks again. And you told me about F star being, in your words, or from what I captured, you told me that F star will actually spit out whatever intermediate language slash bytecode that
Yeah,
another system
I think it will
relies
do.
on for execution. And so
I think.
I'm going.
Yep.
What's up?
I was just. I'm pretty sure it's like F sharp or a camel. I can't remember if it's both or just F sharp.
Yeah, so I'm going to look into that because I'm a geek like that, and honestly, I think the more I set myself apart from mainstream, the more money I could ask for. The more tools that I have at my disposal, I think the more likely I am to solve problems faster and of higher quality. So that's why I'm attracted to functional programming because it gives me an opportunity to increase my worth by having alternative techniques to resolve a problem. So all right, I'm getting delirious now, but thanks again. I am hitting the stop broadcast button in 3, 2, 1.